Well, today I have the pleasure of sitting down and talking with the indomitable Congresswoman from Wyoming, Representative Harriet Hageman. And oh my goodness, do we have an important topic for you today. We are going to be talking about the electronic ID mandate for U.S. cattle and bison. Congresswoman, welcome to the Nourishing Liberty podcast. Thank you so much for being on here and talking about this topic that's vital, I will say, to our food security and so unknown.
It's wonderful to be with you today.
Now, we were talking just a little bit about how you got started on this topic. So I'd like to cover that for sure, because these histories are really important. But I also want to share that just a few days ago, the USDA sent out a press release. And in that release, they say, April 26th, they say today, by amending and strengthening its animal disease traceability regulations for certain cattle and bison, the USDA is putting in place the technology, tools, and processes to help quickly pinpoint and respond to costly foreign animal diseases. That sounds so great, but you and I both know there's a lot more to it, and we're both biased against this rule and see it as the disaster it is. So can you explain what is the digital ID in cattle and bison, and why is this a consumer issue too?
So the RFID or EID mandate is to require all of our cattle and bison, or at least a certain percentage of our cattle and bison, to have radio frequency identification ear tags by a certain date. And I think that they perhaps put it in the new rule that it's within the next 6 months that they have to do this. Keep in mind, the USDA has been attempting to enforce and push our cattle producers into using radio frequency identification since 2011, and even before that. And the idea is that that would help us to be able to trace disease much more quickly. At least that's what the selling point is. So USDA and APHIS really started this push in 2011, but there was such an enormous amount of pushback from the industry itself that in 2013, they issued a rule that allowed for the use of a variety of different techniques for identification. So brands, back tags, tattoos, ear tags. Basically your traditional forms of identification that have worked for the last 100 years or so in terms of animal identification and traceability. And that was in place for quite some time. But starting in 2019, APHIS posted a 2-page, what they referred to as a fact sheet on the website, stating that all cattle and bison producers had to have RFID ear tags by January 1, 2023. They did this very surreptitiously. They did this in a way that would have totally it was totally contrary to the 2013 regulation. And it was really, they were trying to pull a fast one. So that's what I really got involved. Was in 2019. I was hired by an organization and some ranchers in Wyoming and South Dakota to challenge that RFID mandate. And I did so under the Administrative Procedure Act, because agencies are prohibited from using what we refer to as guidance documents to impose mandates on any particular regulated community. So after we filed the lawsuit, USDA was forced to withdraw that particular guidance document. And since then, they have been trying, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 times, they have tried to again circumvent the requirements of the Administrative Procedure Act and push this forward. We continued to push back against them, and that's why last year they finally realized that if they were going to push forward on this agenda, they were going to have to follow the Administrative Procedure Act. Now, it doesn't mean what they're doing is legal, but at least they have tried to more specifically follow the Administrative Procedure Act. They still violate the APA in the issuance of this regulation, but at least they recognize they're not going to get anywhere unless they at least try to follow the APA.
Yeah, and this is that speaks to kind of the legal process of what's involved, what happened, what's happening now. But overall, why is this such a disaster? And now I don't like to use hyperbole, and I try to avoid sensationalism as much as possible, but I think we can fairly say this idea is a disaster and it will really wreak havoc on our small and mid-sized farms and ranches.
Our independent producers. So we're going to kind of separate this out. So from the bison standpoint, bison are not readily handled. You can tell by looking at them that you're going to have special equipment, and it's going to be difficult to handle them. In fact, I was just recently visiting with a bison rancher out of West Virginia, and I said, how often do you actually handle those animals? And she described what they have to do in order to do anything with them. And it's pretty extreme. You know, they're so front heavy and their heads are so enormous. And they are not animals who are domesticated. They're really not used to being in confined situations. So it becomes much more dangerous. And from the standpoint of our tribal members, they do not view bison as livestock. They view bison as wildlife. And so we have had a big push over the last couple of years for our tribal members to get back into handling and working with bison as part of some of the economic development we've seen on our reservations. And then here they are, the federal government immediately comes in and says, yeah, and you're going to have to start treating them as livestock and put RFID ear tags in them. So from the standpoint of our tribal members and the handling of bison, what's very obvious to me is that USDA and APHIS have no concept of what you have to do to handle bison. So that's one category that you have to think about. As far as the cattle side of it, what they keep trying to do, because this is such a costly endeavor, in 2013, when they did that regulation, the USDA acknowledged that the cost to our industry would be between, for a full RFID mandate, the cost to the industry would be between 1.2 and $1.9 billion. So absolutely astronomically expensive. In fact, you would put most cattle producers out of business with a mandate because these are terribly expensive pieces of equipment. In addition to the equipment, you have to have the software, you have to have the computer equipment, you have to have the wands, and you're going to have to be handling your livestock on a more often basis. So they recognize that the cost of this is astronomical. So what they've been trying to do is kind of slice and dice the industry to try to get the numbers down to the smallest that they possibly can, so that it does not demonstrate right out of the box that this is a huge unfunded mandate. So with this latest rule, they estimate that the cost to the industry is going to be about $26.1 million a year. Well, that's silly because number one, that only accounts for the buttons themselves. It only accounts for the ear tags. It doesn't account for the wands. It doesn't account for all the equipment you need to actually make the RFID effective, to actually put it into operation so that you could actually do the traceability. So it's just the buttons themselves, the RFID ear tags themselves, that are the $26 billion. But the other thing they did is they said it will only apply to those cattle that have to cross state lines. Well, for a state like Wyoming, we don't have a big packing plant. So the vast majority of our livestock is going to go to Kansas, Iowa, Nebraska, Texas to be finished, and then to be slaughtered from there. So for us, almost all of our livestock at some point in their life cycle, they will be transferred across state lines. But in Texas and Kansas and Nebraska and Iowa, where they have these big feedlots, they won't have to have the RFID ear tags. But think about it. Your cattle out on the range are not the ones that are at high risk of disease transmission. It's in your confined animal feeding operations that you have more of a risk of disease transmission, right? I mean, that just makes sense, right?
Yeah,
Yet those
absolutely.
are the people they're excluding. That's the category of livestock that they're actually excluding. So right off the bat, you know, well, wait a minute, then this isn't about traceability, because if you don't do traceability for 100% of the livestock, then your entire program fails to operate. It can't launch. Because if the source is a spayed heifer in Kansas that somehow contracted brucellosis, that heifer is not going to have the RFID ear tag. Yet, so you see what I mean? Traceability only applies if everybody's in the pool. But so what they say, what USDA has said in this rule is that only 11% of our producers would be subject to this rule. Well, if only 11% is subject to the rule, then the rule will never be effective. It won't do what they want it to do or what they're claiming it could do. So right out of the box, you have to start thinking, well, then what is the purpose of this? Is this about disease traceability, or is this about something else? There's 2 points I would make. I'll point to Ireland. In early 2022, Ireland adopted an RFID mandate for their cattle. By August of 2023, Ireland was ordering the slaughter of 41,000 head of cows, not because of a disease outbreak, but because of global warming. Okay, so anybody who thinks that this isn't about controlling our food supply and limiting our food supply and restricting people's choices in terms of being able to buy and consume meat is not paying attention. So all we have to do is look at Ireland, and we know exactly where this is going. We know exactly what it is that they are trying to do. And then the other aspect of this is just the first step. They're going to keep going, and they'll next year they're going to find another category of people that they'll EID, or another category of livestock that they'll EID. And then the year after that, they'll do another one. So this is incrementalism. And then finally, you made the point, you used the word in your opening dialogue there, which is the word foreign. Why are we importing livestock that have issues from countries that have issues of disease, foot and mouth, all of these things? Why are we bringing in? Why is the USDA importing livestock with diseases, or from countries who do not have the same standards that we have? And then turning around and saying, oh, but all of our domestic producers are the ones that have to have the RFID ear tags. None of this makes sense. And I think that those few things that I've talked about, I think that they expose this agenda for what it really is.
Absolutely. And, it's so important to me that you touched on that issue of control and the limiting of our meat and everything that goes along with that. Because one of the things we talk about every single episode on this podcast is food security and getting to know your food sources, participating in production. And it goes hand in hand with that. Because if we can decentralize, right, not rely on the big CAFOs and the overarching federal government, if we can decentralize and have food production in our communities or just surrounding them, I mean, that's a different situation. And not having the foreign imports.
That's right. We can produce all the cattle we need.
Yeah, I actually have a question for you about that. And maybe you can clarify something for me. So I know that a lot of, because grass-fed beef is so popular right now and it's being imported, some of those imports of people's grass-fed beef are live imports, right? They're coming over on boats. And so I'm really confused. They're not going to have any kind of electronic ID or disease traceability?
Well, they claim that they do, but I first of all, I don't trust this. I don't trust these agencies to actually be doing that. But yes, these are live imports. And this is one of the reasons why I have a distrust of the USDA and APHIS right now. There's a couple of reasons, but one is this whole idea of country of origin labeling. They import livestock into the United States, and then when they're slaughtered here, they're allowed to put on the package made in the USA. So you may have a Brazilian steer or a Chinese heifer, whatever it might be, and they get to label that as being U.S. as raised. That's why I have what's called an MCOOL bill, mandatory country of origin labeling, that states that unless that animal from being born all the way through slaughter is actually from the United States of America, it cannot carry the Made in USA label. And I truly believe this is one of the most significant and important bills for the livestock industry, for the beef industry, because I believe that most people in the United States would prefer to have American raised and processed beef. We don't want it coming from Brazil. We don't want it coming from Colombia and these other countries. So that's one issue that I think is very important. And it's oftentimes the USDA and the big packers. It's the packers that fight us tooth and nail on MCOOL. It was in place for a very short period of time and repealed in 2014, but it's the packers. And in part, the packers it's the packer side of things when you have like the NCBA that supports this, the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. The packers really dominate that organization, and they want this RFID. They want the RFID mandate. So there's some of them that have pushed behind it. In fact, when you go back to 2011, 2013, and even thereafter, when you look at the biggest proponents of RFID, of the RFID mandate, it was our packers and the ear tag manufacturing companies, neither of which should be a surprise to anyone. So they want to vertically integrate. They want to get rid of the independent producer. They want to kind of go the way that Walmart has to a certain extent. And that is, they don't want to buy cattle from my family or other families in Wyoming. They want to own it all. They want to own the ranches. They want to own the land. And they basically want our livestock producers to become serfs to them.
Absolutely. Now, just for clarification purposes, for those who don't know what you mean when you say packers, let's just dissect that a little bit and talk about, we have basically a monopoly of meat packers in the US, where 85% of the meat coming into our households and restaurants and institutions all come from only 4 packers. So can you clarify that a little bit for everybody who's just not aware of that enormity?
Well, your big packers, I believe 2 are from Brazil, one's from China, and one is from the United States. And so they really do have a monopoly. And when you see things happening on a national scale with some of these, I don't know, so some of the things that have been happening in these big packing facilities, you kind of get back to the idea that I'd like to go with a more local source. And what's been fantastic is over the last couple of years, especially, we've kind of seen an explosion of these smaller, mid-sized slaughter facilities, processing facilities, and they might be able to do 10 a week or 25 a week or 37 a week, whatever the number is. They're not doing thousands and thousands and thousands, but they're typically locally owned and operated, and people can go there and get custom meat. And it's been a great development in the cattle and in the beef industry. The EPA just last week issued rules related to water quality that is potentially going to shut down all those independents. So we have so many things coming at us from these various federal agencies. And what I am going to come back to again is a lot of this is with this radical agenda that is based upon global warming and limiting our ability to consume meat. So when we laugh about eating crickets, or we talk about the World Economic Forum, and surely that's not going to happen here, it is happening here, and it's happening with the various federal agencies that I'm talking about. They are taking a whole of government approach. In fact, that was one of the first executive orders that Joe Biden issued, was a whole of government approach to combat climate change. It's their religion, and this is part of the way they're doing it. The industries are getting squeezed from every single side, and one of them is EPA, but one of them is the USDA, again, with this RFID mandate.
Well, Congresswoman, you've been a champion during your time in Congress. I know that you've been a supporter on other small farmer issues, and, like you said, the country of origin labeling and bringing awareness to this electronic ID issue. And thank you for your work in Congress, because we absolutely need those of you there standing up and saying, no, this has to stop. And you're right. The eventual outcome is this destruction of our food security. And I can see it so clearly. You can. So what do you say to people, like ordinary families who are maybe even struggling to make ends meet, but have to put dinner on the table every day? What can we all do in our households to help protect our food security?
So one of the things I think people need to understand is, especially in the interior West, one of the only ways we have economic development on literally millions of acres is through grazing. Cattle are amazing animals in terms of their efficiency of turning grass into something that's incredibly delicious.
Yeah.
They are a hardy animal. They can live in hot weather. They can live in cold weather. They can live in wind. They can live in an area where there's an abundant supply of water. They can live in an area that has more water limitations, availability limitations, they truly are an amazing animal, in addition to which it's some of the most highest and efficient protein that we can consume as human beings in terms of brain development, muscle development, health, all of those things. Beef is very, very, very good for you. And it is why, even with some of the higher prices, and I bought a steak the other night, I won't tell you the price that I paid, but I can have it for 4 meals because it is so efficient, and it is something that is really in the long run very cost effective. But people need to understand that the more that you have, such as the Department of Interior, the BLM, trying to stop grazing on BLM lands in the interior West, those lands become completely barren and produce no revenue for the local communities, for the states, or for the federal government. So you're talking about policy decisions that will have very long-term economic impacts, negative impacts at the local, state, and federal level, because there's nothing else to do with these lands. You can go out there with a bicycle, you can go out there and hike. That doesn't generate revenue. We have found a way to use these resources in a way that benefits every person in this country, whether they're a cattle rancher or they live in downtown Newark, New Jersey, because we generate revenue off these lands for the federal government, and we produce a product that people want and that is good for them. So when you look at these policy decisions being made, there are so many layers of wrong-headedness associated with it. And again, it is the people back here in Washington, D.C. are the ones making the decisions that don't know what they're talking about. I'll give you a very direct example. Wednesday, I had the opportunity to question Deb Haaland, the head of the Department of Interior, in one of our natural resource hearings. This woman is absolutely clueless as to what is going on with her agency. Right now, the BLM is redoing the Rock Springs Resource Management Plan. And when they came out with a proposed plan last fall, it was a disaster. They're taking 3.6 million acres of land in southwestern Wyoming and basically making the majority of that off limits for recreation, for grazing, for mining, for oil and gas development. It would be devastating to the economy in Wyoming, but it also impacts affordable energy in the United States as a whole. So I had her under oath. She was in front of our committee yesterday, and I said, are you familiar with the Rock Springs RMP? And she said, no, I don't know anything about that. You're the head of the agency. This is one of the most significant resource management plans being completed at this point in time. You're either running a rogue agency where you have no idea what's going on, or you're being dishonest, or you're totally incompetent, or maybe it's all of the above. But these are terrible things that we're learning when we've got agency heads who are totally clueless as to what their agencies are doing in terms of negatively impacting the American citizens.
Wow, that's big. And I will add to your list. First of all, I loved your ode to cattle, basically. I agree with you on all of that. They're so nutritious there. And I'll add to that we 100% humanity needs, our natural resources need, our grazing herbivores. And prior to Europeans coming over here, the bison filled that role. Right. And we have topsoil and we have the land we have because of the bison. Now we've largely replaced that with cattle. We need them. They are literally creating the soil that sustains our lives. Yes. And I think we cannot overemphasize that, because like you're saying, these policies, they erode, and that is a perfectly relevant term here. They erode our ability on so many levels to feed ourselves and to have food security. And what is American freedom if not being able to feed ourselves?
So I'll give an example of Sudan. And Sudan has been in the throes of a civil war for several decades now. And one of the first things they did in Sudan is they rounded up all of the people who lived in the country and they moved them into refugee camps. They urbanized them. Anybody hear of 15-minute cities? It's the same concept. They urbanized them. And over 90% of all the food consumed in Sudan is imported. So whenever that government wants to control the masses, whenever there's an uprising, whenever there's an effort to say, this guy is really not very good for us. We live in abject poverty and life is really bad. Whenever there is even the hint that there is going to be an effort to get rid of him, what does he do? He starves them.
Yep.
He controls the food supply. By controlling the food supply, he controls the masses. Now, is that an extreme example? Yeah, it sure is. But it's a contemporary one. And we've watched it play out for year after year after year after year after year. The UN can talk all they want about the humanity, and they can talk all they want about global warming. They can talk all they want about climate change. And this is an existential crisis, ignoring the very crises that are happening in real time before their eyes, because you have dictators, despots, and tyrants that control the food supply. That is why we cannot allow our government to control our food supply. Whether it is our fruits and vegetables, or it is our meat, our lamb, our pork, whatever it is, we do not want to vertically integrate, because what you then do is you have concentrated the power in the food supply in the hands of a very few people, in addition to which of destroying the economy in all of these rural areas, which would just be absolutely devastating. Where I come from, it's an ag, it's entirely ag. There's very little industry other than that, because that's what we have there. We have the North Platte River, we have the North Platte Project, we have beautiful irrigation water, we have a climate that allows us to grow crops and raise cattle and do these things and really feed the world. And we're very proud of that. And we're constantly feeling like the government is working against that. And for me, that's such a seismic shift in terms of what government should do. The way that our Constitution is written, the way that our government was formed, the foundation of by, and for the people, our government should never become our enemy. But with the policies that they're pursuing, they have become an enemy of the prosperity of the American people.
Yeah. And it's pretty important that we step up and take action. And I'll make one comment, and then I want you to say what action we can take. But also, just a couple hundred years ago, and our history and the history of the natives, the American government paid hunters to kill the bison, yes, to starve out the native people. And in a way, like, that could happen again, or any enemy of the American people could use the consolidation and centralization of our food supply to do the same thing. But okay, Congresswoman, last thoughts. What do we do? Like, this is not a bill in Congress that we can call our reps and say, vote against this. It's already a rule at the USDA.
No, but I have a bill to defund it.
Okay, awesome. Tell us about that.
You can call your representatives in Congress and say, please support Harriet Hageman's EID bill.
Okay.
So that's one thing that they can do, because I am trying to defund their effort to implement this. Great. The other thing is that you have to be involved in these rulemakings. I'm trying to do fundamental administrative reform, Administrative Procedure Act reform, but that's going to take some time. So in the meantime, this is the framework within which we have to work. And the fact is, we have been able to block their efforts to force EID on us for over 4.5 years, 5.5 years. Now, and that January 1st, 2023 date was a magic date for USDA. I think it probably had something to do with the UN, but that was a magic date, and we have forced them to blow through that in terms of this EID mandate. So we have been able to push back either through litigation or through stalling the process or threatening them with litigation or going after their refusal to comply with the law. We have been able to block this, but we need more people engaged in that fight. We need them saying to USDA, no, we're not going to allow you to adopt this rule. We don't, this is not right. So you need to engage. We recently stopped the Natural Asset Company, which should be another podcast. We can talk about the effort of the SEC to securitize all of our natural assets, such as air and wind and toadstools and grass and dirt and all of those things. We stopped that because the American people rose up, and we were able to, in a matter of weeks, get thousands of comments opposed to that rule filed with the SEC, and they withdrew it. So engaging in this process, when it is really a very strong showing of opposition, we can put them back on their heels and we can stop these things.
Yes, and that is fantastic. So I will make sure to link to your bill in the show notes. Okay. And I will also add, because I'm a huge advocate of this, support our local American ranchers and farmers. Go direct to them. We don't need to be buying imported meat. We've got it right here. And we've got passionate, amazing, wonderful Americans who are growing it and producing it for us. So see how locally you can spend your food dollars. Any final thoughts? And thank you again for all your efforts to push back on these ridiculous policies and rules.
Well, we'll
They're
keep
coming.
doing it. And having the support of the American people in rural America means a ton to me. It just does. People can go to my website, my official website. I think it's hageman.house.gov. You can see what else I'm doing, the other work that I've been doing. But just having the support of people and the letters that I receive and the opportunity to visit with people when I'm out in Wyoming and in other states. This afternoon, I'm actually heading to Minnesota, and we're having a field hearing tomorrow to try to find a way to delist the wolves in Minnesota. They have devastated the deer population, the wildlife population in Minnesota. They are just absolutely running rampant, and we're going to go have a hearing and see if we can try to fix that and protect our cattle and livestock producers in Minnesota. They're getting hit hard by the wolves.
Yeah, they are. I've seen that as well. Well, thank you for everything you're doing there. And yes, you've got a lot of people on the outside working at it from different angles. So we all got to work together on this.
Yes, we do. So thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. And remember, eat for health, know your neighbor, and grow some food. This is the Nourishing Liberty podcast. Thank you so much, Congresswoman.
Thank you.